Okay, that's more like it. Now, I begin my text from the book of Deuteronomy in the 11th chapter in the 19th verse, where it teaches us, "And we shall teach them your children, speaking of them when they sit in the house, and when they walk the way, when they rise down, and when they rise up." In other words, the importance of teaching our children. And that is something that is most necessary in this day and time of much confusion. As I greet you from Friendship AME Church in Mount Pleasant, where the Reverend Alonzo Reddick is the pastor. Now, Ms. Wilson has told you about my sojourns to West Africa. I made two. The last one was with her. And the things that I learned there of great importance. She mentioned that I spoke at the University of Gambia in West Africa. And I told the students there that when I got back to America, I would tell the people the truth about Africa. Because if I tell the people here the truth about Africa, they would understand better the truth about themselves and who they are today. So it's most appropriate that I come before you this morning to bring you that message. First of all, how did we wind up here in the first place? Well, number one, back in 1502, Christopher Columbus was on his third voyage to the Caribbean islands, and he brought along with him on that voyage a Spanish priest by the name of Father Bartolomé de Casas. And Father Bartolomé was horrified at how Columbus was treating the Native American Indians in that region. So he said this was a sin against God. Something must be done to alleviate the suffering of these people. His solution, go to Africa and use the blacks instead. In 1527, he wrote in his Historia de los Indios that he begged God to forgive him due to his error under ignorance because he saw what this had wrought. Meanwhile, in West Africa, you had what was known as the Songhai Empire, a mighty kingdom that lasted from modern-day Senegal on the coast to the upper part of what is now the Congo. And like all great empires, Rome, Babylon, Greece, Egypt, it's like in the words of Sir Isaac Newton, the great scientist, what goes up must come down. A great king named Askia Muhammad had these greedy sons who overthrew him when he went blind in 1528 and overtook the throne. And they spent years fighting among each other until the people of Morocco invaded them. And when the Moroccans invaded them, that weakened the kingdom, leading them down into the transcontinental slave trade with the Europeans. Now, oftentimes I get this stuff from people, well, the Africans sold each other as slaves. I'm like, hold up, okay? First of all, number one, their kingdom was in chaos, okay? Their civilization was in peril. And secondly, it was not the Africans who built the slave ports or built the slave ships or initiated that trade. So, I mean, you gotta really think before people say these type of things, and you have to do your research to answer them correctly when they deal with this sort of thing. So, anyway, with all of this, they established places like Cape Coast and Elmina Castle down in Ghana, and Gorée Island, where Ms. Wilson and I ventured last summer, and I was there the summer before that. Now, what they do there is that you get off of this boat, which is off the coast of Senegal, and this is the furthest island off the West African coast, to make it closer to the Western Hemisphere. You get off of this boat, and there are these drummers and musicians that greet you, and they march you down to where the slave ports were located, where you see these cells in which they were kept. So they then march you to what's called the Door of No Return, which was where they had the planks that led up from the cells to the slave ships. So during this last visit, a young lady who was with us named Miss Phyllis Holmes, I was one of two people on that second trip that had been there before, and I was concerned about the others. So I asked Miss Holmes, how did you feel now that you walked through that? And her words to me were as follows. I've always wondered what my ancestors saw, what they smelled, how they felt when they walked on these slave ships. And now that I have walked where they have walked and seen where I have seen and smelled what they have smelled, I feel a sense of closure and I feel hope. And I said, Phyllis, you took the words right out of my mouth. So they brought us to many different parts of the Western Hemisphere. But here's what happened in South Carolina. In 1526, there was a Spanish conqueror by the name of Juan Lucas Vasquez de Ayala. King Ferdinand sent him there. And he landed with a boatload of Spaniards and Africans to what we now call Georgetown, South Carolina. But he named it as the colony of San Miguel Guadalupe. And the colony of San Miguel Guadalupe was short-lived because Captain Vasquez died early in the voyage. And so he left behind a dictator-type leader by the name of Jiménez Doncel. But Jiménez Doncel was so bad that one night the Africans surrounded his hut and set it on fire with the expected results. And they ran back into the woods where they married into the Waccamaw tribe of Native American Indians. And their descendants are believed to be among the black people of Georgetown, South Carolina today. So one thing that has to be clear, folks, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and all of them did a lot of good, but the civil rights movement did not start in Alabama in 1955. It was going on right here in South Carolina in 1526 when those first slave ships came here. Always keep that in mind. So among the interesting things that happened with that was that on the islands from Georgetown, South Carolina to Brunswick, Georgia, they had the Sea Islands where you had the rice plantations. So they needed somebody who knew how to grow rice in these areas. So they selected black people from around Sierra Leone and Liberia, which were known as the Gola tribe. Sound familiar? And the Kisei tribe. Sound familiar? So when they were brought over here, those islands were so isolated that those black people kept more of their African speech, folkways, and culture than any other black people brought to these United States. And this is where we get the Gullah and Geechee culture. My grandmother, Janie Fordham, was born in Onaw, South Carolina around 1900. And because she had to work in the fields as a girl, she never had the opportunity to go to school to learn to read and write. So she spoke Gullah to her the day she died. In 1968, when I was 4 years old, she would call me in the house by going, Damon, y'all churn too trifling. Y'all better come on in y'all for I bumps y'all, and things like that. So in 1932, Dr. Lorenzo Dow Turner, a black linguist from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, came to teach at South Carolina State, Orangeburg. And he met students from Johns Island who said things like, man, Dr. Turner, you hold up in your man, up the window. Excuse me, man, Dr. Turner, he went up and up the window? Why, what type of speech is this? I find this fascinating. This I must study. So he went throughout coastal South Carolina and Georgia. And in 1949, he wrote Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. And in 1988, General Joseph Momo of Sierra Leone spoke at the Penn Center in 70 miles south of here in St. Helens Island. And he got up in front of the people and said in his native tongue, I'm glad to see you today. And a lady in the audience who spoke Gullah replied, pray God, that man for talk like we. He sounds like us. So the man who was Bladi Pasidum took the people that talk like we back to Sierra Leone. And the people on both sides were amazed at the similarities of languages, lifestyles, and culture that PBS went along with them and filmed a documentary that was fittingly entitled Family Across the Sea. There are many stories I can tell you what happened with that, but one in particular that I want to concentrate on briefly. And that is that after the fall of slavery and the end of the Confederacy, you had what was called the Reconstruction era. This was largely censored from our history books for many years, for reasons I'm going to get into in a little bit. That was the period when, from 1865 to 1877, when the federal government tried to do right by the African American by passing the 13th Amendment in 1865 that ended slavery. The 14th Amendment in 1868 said that all persons born here were citizens. The 15th Amendment in 1870 that said that all men born here had the right to vote. Women would get that in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. So you also have a situation where 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered over at the Julius Wade Teesbury Judicial Center. It's now known as that, but then it was the Charleston Clubhouse, where these 76 blacks and 48 whites tried to reform the state from January to April of 1868 by passing the most revolutionary constitution that you've ever seen in American history up to that time. They called for such things as all children, that all women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands. No one would go to jail for debt. All laws dealing with race discrimination would be stricken from the books. And on January 23rd, 1868, the great Robert Smalls, that courageous man who sneaked himself and his family aboard a Confederate ship called the Planet in Charleston Harbor and off into freedom, Robert Smalls got up in that building, January 23rd, 1868, and said these words: "Resolve, all children in South Carolina between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public school at least 6 months a year under penalty of non-compliance." That, ladies and gentlemen, was the first public school law ever passed this far south below the Mason-Dixon line. From 1870 to 1877, there were 2 black lieutenant governors of South Carolina: Alonzo Jacob Ransier from 1870 to 1872, and Richard Howard Bleaves, who served from 1872 to 1877. Richard Howard Bleaves was lieutenant governor under Governor Franklin Jacob Moses, making this the first time in American history, or perhaps anywhere, where you had a black lieutenant governor and a Jewish governor running the state. In Louisiana, they had a black governor by the name of Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback. In 1873, he tried to run for the U.S. Senate from Louisiana. He won the election, but they refused to seat him. So according to page 442 and 443 of the Congressional Record of 1873, he got up and said these immortal words: "I am a man. I am an American citizen. But from this day forward, I shall not follow the dictates of the Democratic Party. I shall not follow the dictates of the Republican Party. From this day forward, I shall follow the dictates of my heart and of my conscience." Now, when I tell people these things, they usually ask me 2 questions. Number 1, why haven't I heard any of this before? And number 2, well, what the heck happened? I'll explain them both. Throughout the history of the Deep South, the wealthy class of whites' deepest fear was that the poor whites, in their poverty, in their illiteracy, and in their subjugation, would find common cause with their black brethren and come together and create a revolution that would overthrow the rule of the wealthy class of whites. So, to prevent that from happening, these wealthy whites indoctrinated the poor whites with the idea that if black people had equality with them, the poor whites would be on the bottom of society. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, divide and conquer of the poor so that the rich could stay rich. And that's what racism is all about, Charlie Brown. So, December 24th, 1865, at the courthouse in Pulaski, Tennessee, 6 Confederate veterans got together to form the Resistance Army against Reconstruction. They named themselves after the Greek word for circle, which is kuklos, and the Scottish word for family, which is clan. You see where that went? All right. So, for the next 12 years, the Southland bathed in blood. Memphis Massacre of 1866, New Orleans Massacre of 1866, Meridian, Mississippi Massacre of 1871, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre of 1875, Hamburg, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, Elgin, South Carolina Massacre of 1876, and November the 8th, 1876, right down the street from us on Broad Street, blacks and whites shot it out in the middle of the street. Federal government said, yo, this is too much, man. We can't handle this. We got to put a stop to this mess. And they created the Tilden-Hayes Compromise of 1877 that ended Reconstruction. One result of that was that Mildred Rutherford and her organization, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, went on a national crusade censoring things like what I just told you out of the history books and replacing it with pro-Confederate history. Those books were in our classrooms till 1984 with the Education Improvement Act. Therefore, in 1895, our senior senator, Benjamin Ryan Tillman, called a convention at the South Carolina legislature to throw out the progressive Reconstruction Constitution and replace it with the Segregation Convention. As described in my current book, which Ms. Wilson had up there just now, the 1895 segregation fight in South Carolina, 6 brave black leaders, Robert Smalls, who I just discussed, William J. Whipper, a black lawyer on Broad Street, Thomas Miller, the founding president of our black university, South Carolina State, James Wig and Isaiah Reed, 2 black lawyers from Beaufort, South Carolina, and Robert Anderson, a black teacher from Georgetown. These brave black men risked their lives to go before the State House and argue with intelligence, argue with integrity, and argue with eloquence against the Segregation Constitution. They lost 116 to 7 in the legislature, but that loss planted the seeds for the civil rights movement that was to come to undo all of that. In simple terms, ladies and gentlemen, in the short term, they lost the battle, and in the long term, they won the war. Now, with all that being said, getting back to Africa, some amazing things happened during both of my visits there. When I got off the plane during my first visit, I was met by a man named Mr. Sekou Kasama, and it was my first time on African soil, so I'm a little bewildered. He walked up to me, "Are you the professor?" I said, "Yes, I am." So he goes, "Salam alaikum, my brother. I am Sekou. I will be your guide during this visit, and you will be in my care." And I said, "Yes, sir." I mean, and when an African tells you "Assalamu alaikum" on African soil, that just gives an extra true meaning beyond the cliche that's sometimes used over here. So we got to this van, and we went down the freeway to Dakar, which is the capital city of Senegal. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. It's one thing when you read that there are advanced cities in Africa run by nothing but Africans, but when you grow up here in America where you're 1/12 of the population, and you drive through these modern, advanced cities with multi-story hotels, skyscrapers, freeways, and all these universities and things like that, what it does to your system is something far more than you could ever get from a book. And it's important that people like myself who see these things come back and tell you these things so that you can understand that there is more to the situation than what you see over here. So we went to the University of the West African Civilization Center, where we met Dr. Usman Sene. And he told me a lot of wise things. And one of the wise things he told me was this, that I want to pick up on near the end of this lecture. He said that a wise man plants a seed, but knows that he may not live to sit in the shade. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. And among other the great things that happened over there was that, you know, Africans can look at you and tell what tribal group you belong to. Just like the same way, if you go to James Island, somebody can point at you and say, "Oh, I know you were Singleton," or "I know you were Maxwell," or "I know you were Richardson," and so forth here in Charleston. Well, everywhere I went in Senegal, people kept saying that I was Wolof people over there, right? So we went to the Museum of Black Civilization in Dakar, and so our guide was a young lady who was a student at the University of Dakar. Her name was Kaidiba, and she's roughly about 21 or 22 years old. Brilliant young lady, speaks fluent English and French along with her tribal languages. So I kept looking at her, and she kept looking at me through the whole time of this, right? And Sekou, he's smiling and laughing through this whole thing, and I'm wondering, this is weird, what's going on? And so Sekou said, "Professor, come here for a minute." I said, "Yeah, what is it?" And so he looked at the young lady and whispered to her, and she looked at me and goes, "Mon Dieu, mon frère." French for "my God, my brother." I'm like, "Huh? What is this?" And she goes, "Professor, come meet your well-off sister. And this young lady, Miss Barbara can tell you this. She could pass for my daughter or younger sister. The facial resemblance was that deep. You talk about crying. Well, we went there again over the summer, and I met with her again, and I read these words to her, that the great poet Langston Hughes has said that the night is beautiful, and beautiful are the souls of my people. And my resemblance to you, our resemblance to each other, was one big, great example of that, and the fact that no matter what has happened between our two groups, the African and the African American are flesh of one flesh and blood of one blood. And so she gave our group a tour of the museum and so forth, and of course we cried and embraced. But here's the weird thing about that, is that before I left, I found out that about these Wolof people. Not only do I look like them, but guess what? They were the storytellers and the historians of that part of West Africa. So these are the kinds of things you learn when you go there and see these things for yourself. And it is so important that we teach our young children that there is more to this than what they see on YouTube and the music videos and the sharing of the fight videos and all these type of things and the nonsense and the negativity that they constantly hear around. And we as adults have to do our part in this. We have to avoid telling our young kids stuff like, well, you know, black people can't get together for nothing. We like crabs in the barrel, because that plants the negative seed in their mind. And I understand some people teach that because with most people, what they see and what they hear is what they know. But we must expand beyond that. We have to do the duty of, if the parents don't know themselves, take the kids to the library. Ask the librarian for age-appropriate books where the children can learn these type of things, where the parents and the children can learn together. And it is so important, especially, that we who have been raised, and Miss Wilson's known me since she was 8 years old, so she can tell you this. Our neighborhood was one where the elders were the elders of all the children, whether they were related or not. Okay? Any adult can tell you, if they saw you smoking or cursing in the street and all that, they get that back to your parents in a minute. But a generation has rebelled against these things and thrown them away, and we have seen the results of that. And those results are not good. Because right now, as we speak, the prophet Jeremiah warned the nation of Judea that it was falling down because of its iniquity. All right? The prophet Daniel in the Bible warned King Nebuchadnezzar and the empire of Babylon about their iniquity. Christ himself and the Apostle Paul warned that the empire of ancient Rome was falling down because it was iniquity. And one of the things that you don't often hear about Martin Luther King is that in 1968, he said that he read the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, and he said, when I look at my America around me today, I have to say that the similarities are frightening. And right now in 2024, that is more true than ever before. So what we have to do is, there's one solution to all of this. Those of you who have been raised with sense, who have been raised with wise parents, who've been raised with understanding, you got to get with these kids, and you got to plant those seeds. Now, where we make the mistake is that we assume that when we tell them these things, they'll automatically get it. It doesn't work like that. You tell it to them when they're young, and they mature, and they realize what you were saying, and eventually they get it. We can't expect instant results. It doesn't work like that. Because those of you in this audience who are teachers, those of you who are parents, you know that there are times when you have told your children things and they shrug it off at the time. But years later, they come back and tell you, you know you were right about that. And I wish I'd listened. So, what we got to do is we got to plant those seeds with the understanding that we may not live to see the shade, but at least if we have planted those seeds, we have done our part. And if we do that, as in the words of Deuteronomy 11:19, teaching our children, speaking of them when they sit us in the house, or when they walk us the way, or when they lie us down, and when they rise us up. We will have done our part, and God will have smiled on us. And on that note, thank you for listening. You're welcome.